My wife Jenny and I first met 7 years ago at a party of mutual friends. I still remember the first time I saw her in a crowded room, laughing with a group of people. She had a captivating smile that lit up her entire face. Her wavy brown hair framed her green eyes beautifully. I was immediately attracted to her warm and simmering personality. We hit it off right away and talked all evening until the party was over. Before getting married last spring, Jenny and I dated for 5 wonderful years. I finally worked up the courage to propose during our anniversary dinner at her favorite Italian restaurant downtown. I hid the ring at the bottom of her dessert, a molten lava cake. When she pulled out the little velvet box of melted chocolate, she awed as I dropped to one knee. With happy tears in her eyes, she said yes. All the guests in the restaurant applauded and congratulated us, and we sealed it with a sweet kiss. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. We decided to make our wedding small and intimate, with close friends and family. The ceremony was held outdoors under a gorgeous willow tree in the botanical garden. Jenny looked absolutely dazzling, walking down the grass aisle in her lace wedding dress. We wrote our own heartfelt vows, and Jenny got teardrops on her cheeks from what was happening. The reception afterwards was filled with laughter, dancing, and celebrating our love. It was the perfect start to our new life together as a married couple. After a honeymoon spent in the Italian countryside, we began our search for a home. My parents helped us by suggesting my childhood apartment, which they were renting out. It was fully furnished, and the rent was very affordable. It wasn't huge, but it was cozy and comfortable for the two of us. The fact that we were able to turn it into our own little love nest meant a lot. Becoming a married couple came with some changes. Even though we were practically living together, we still had to compromise on sharing space and household chores. Sometimes we quarreled over small things, but we always resolved everything calmly. For the most part, our relationship went smoothly, without serious quarrels. However, in the last 6 months, I began to notice subtle changes in Jenny's attitude and behavior. She used to always talk excitedly about the patients she helped at the dental office, where she worked as a receptionist. Lately, her tone has become more angry. After a long day at work, she talks about the annoying patients she has to deal with. She reminisces enviously about her friends who are stay-at-home wives and moms, and whose husbands earn enough to support the whole family. Between the lines, I realize that she wishes I could provide her with a lifestyle too, so she wouldn't have to work. I dragged my feet as I walked up the steps to our apartment, dreading the thought of having to break the bad news to Jenny. The conversation I had with my boss that day still haunted me to this day. I nervously asked him about the possibility of getting a long-awaited raise. I carefully explained why I thought I deserved a bigger paycheck, that I consistently put my best foot forward. I had a great sales record, and I was willingly taking on additional responsibilities. He nodded, but then regretfully informed me that the corporation couldn't approve a pay raise right now, especially in an unstable economy. He asked me to stop by in a few months, but it was clear that the answer would still be no. My shoulders slumped as I unlocked the front door. I found Jenny in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner and swaying her hips to the beat of the music. When she saw me, she smiled radiantly and asked me how my day was. I sighed and said we needed to talk. When we sat down at our small kitchen table, her expression changed to one of concern. I recounted the unfortunate encounter with my boss, watching her face fall. She was silent for a moment, mulling over the news. Then she gave vent to her feelings, quickly venting all her frustration. She asked why I didn't push harder for a pay raise. She complained that we could use the extra money to pay off our wedding debts, go on nice dates, and start saving for a house and kids. Her resentment spilled out as she said she was tired of having to pinch pennies. I tried to calm her down and explain that there was nothing more I could do. She ignored me, getting even more frustrated. At the end of her tirade, she bitterly said that she wished we had more financial security like her friend Sarah, whose husband had just bought her a brand new BMW. I remained stunned silent as she slammed the door shut and left for our bedroom. I had never seen her so upset before. My optimism and head in the sand skills usually balanced her fiery temper. But the denial of the pay raise had clearly thrown her off balance. I understood her frustration, but I didn't think it warranted such a dramatic reaction. Besides, she was right in saying that I needed to increase my income if we were going to buy a nice house and start a family. I gave her a chance to cool off for the rest of the evening. When it was time to go to bed, I cautiously entered our bedroom as she was removing her makeup in front of the mirror. Her eyes were still puffy from crying. I walked up behind her, wrapped my arms around her waist, and rested my chin on her shoulder. Feeling eye contact with her reflection, I sincerely apologized for letting her down. She softened a little and placed her hands on mine. She also apologized for losing her temper, but stood by her opinion. I asked if we could just move forward and remain optimistic. She reluctantly nodded, and we went to bed, but I could sense that she was still concerned. For a week after that tense interaction, Jenny was quiet and detached. She spent more time texting with friends or watching TV instead of talking to me. The cold attitude toward me persisted no matter what I said or did to improve her mood. Then one evening, she suddenly announced that she had a few extra weekend shifts at the dental office for the next month. Her coworker was going on maternity leave, and Jenny offered to fill in for her. This was partly to help out since they would be understaffed, but she also admitted that she was saving up to buy herself a new iPhone. I held my tongue to avoid another explosion. I hated to realize that instead of turning to me as her husband to grant this wish, she saw fit to take matters into her own hands. Lies were in every word as she explained what was happening. I just nodded silently, feeling our relationship deteriorating more and more. One Saturday morning, I was abruptly awakened by the phone lying on the nightstand. Squinting against the sunlight streaming into our bedroom, I saw that it was my buddy Alex calling. "Dude, sorry to wake you up, but we need to talk. Meet me at Joe's Diner at 8 p.m., he said urgently. Still disoriented, I pulled on my clothes and headed out the door without even leaving Jenny a note. When I arrived, Alex was stirring his coffee nervously. When I sat down at the table, he got straight to the point, telling me about a disturbing conversation he'd had last night with our old college friend Greg. It turns out that Greg had come to the dental office where Jenny works to have veneers put in. At some point after the appointment, Jenny decided to get his number from his medical history and started flirting with him on the phone. Alex explained that Greg was arrogantly bragging about how this hottie at the front desk was stalking him, not realizing that Alex knew my wife worked there. As soon as Greg mentioned the name of the office, Alex sounded the alarm. He asked to see the messages, and his suspicions were confirmed when he saw Jenny's name. Although the messages started out innocently friendly, they quickly turned obsessive. She called him handsome, asked personal questions, and suggested they meet for a drink sometime. My head was spinning as I tried to make sense of this betrayal. As recently as last month, Jenny adamantly maintained that nothing inappropriate was going on when I asked her about the extra weekend shifts she was working. I noticed that she had started dressing up and wearing perfume more often before these supposed shifts. She insisted that I was just paranoid and jealous. Now it turned out that my intuition had been right all along. Alex had tentatively revealed that Jenny and Greg had met once before over lunch, but Greg had claimed it hadn't been flirting, just casual friendly conversation. However, from her texts, Alex and I agreed that there was no way it could have been just a friendship. She clearly wanted to have an affair with him and was using her fake shifts as a cover. In the heat of the moment, I demanded Greg's number from Alex. He hesitated, warning me to calm down first before doing anything rash. But my temper had already flared. I convinced him that I deserved answers to questions about what was really going on between my wife and an alleged friend. Reluctantly, Alex agreed that it would be better if I knew the whole truth instead of guessing. I went outside to call Greg, barely containing my rage. Thankfully, when he heard how furious I was, he stopped denying that he didn't know my wife. He admitted that Jenny had aggressively pursued him and suggested we meet at a hotel the following weekend. While he admitted that at first he enjoyed feeding his ego, Greg felt ashamed of his role when he realized that I was the husband who had been betrayed. We devised a plan to set up an operation to catch Jenny red-handed during her next fake extra shift. I knew this would be the final nail in the coffin lid of our crumbling marriage, but I was too overwhelmed with anger and disbelief to realize it. I was solely focused on finally exposing her lies and infidelity. The next week flew by agonizingly slowly as I anxiously awaited Saturday, the day Greg and I had set to catch Jenny in the act of cheating. We had agreed on every detail, leaving minimal room for error. I trusted that Greg would play his part convincingly. He still felt guilty for allowing things to go as far as they had with my wife. When the fateful evening finally arrived, I parked a few blocks away from the fancy restaurant they had chosen as their meeting place. I vigilantly monitored the situation from the car. Right on schedule, I noticed Greg enter first, and I slipped into an inconspicuous booth in the corner. 15 tense minutes passed before I noticed Jenny enter, dressed in a tight black dress and heeled shoes. She looked around the room with a happy smile until her gaze stopped on Greg waving at her. I felt my blood pressure rise as I watched her fix her hair and adjust her push-up bra before walking over to him. She looked impatient and excited, not at all like a woman heading out for an innocent lunch with her best friend. They exchanged kisses on the cheeks, and then Jenny sat down at the table, cross-legged defiantly. It made me nauseous to see her snuggling so openly against him, giggling at what he was whispering across the table. Her body language was flirtatious and not forced, implying that this wasn't the first time they'd interacted like this. I clenched my fists as she reached out to playfully touch his arm. The blatant chemistry that sprang up between them was like a knife stabbing deeper and deeper. I continued to furtively glance at her, pretending to read the menu. Their conversation became more and more tactile, hands resting on the table, faces leaning into each other with bedroom-like eyes. The situation was escalating by the minute. Finally, Greg discreetly sent me a prearranged signaling message under the table, signifying that it was time to go. I tensed, exhaled sharply, and headed toward their little love nest. Jenny had her back to me, so she didn't even sense my presence until I was literally at her back. Greg's eyes flashed with surprise, and he began his Oscar-winning performance. "Oh hey, it's great to meet you here," he exclaimed with mocking enthusiasm. Jenny turned her head, her eyes flashing like a deer in headlights as our gazes met. Her cheeks flashed a crimson blush as she realized she'd gotten herself in trouble. She flapped her mouth silently, like a fish in water, and made no excuses for herself. I kept my tone at a dangerous level. "I see you're working weekends again. That's probably why you're so dressed up for this lunch meeting," I stated coldly. The color disappeared from her face. She reflexively recoiled as I grabbed an empty chair from a nearby table and turned it around to join them. Greg got back into the game, recounting all the messages she'd sent and the times they'd chatted behind my back. By the end of it, Jenny was crying silently, streams of mascara running down her cheeks. She realized it was useless to deny anything. I stood up abruptly, pulling her wrist from her seat with force. She followed me without resistance as I stepped outside to hail a cab, too embarrassed to meet my sizzling gaze. The cab ride passed in agonizing silence. When we got home, I told her to pack her things because I wanted her to stay out of my sight today. This time she didn't argue or protest. 15 minutes later, she was already holding her suitcase and purse, still stunned that this was actually happening. I walked her to the cab, stopping just before she got into it. I sharply warned her that this was the last free ride she needed to sort out her own life now, because it was over between us. That's when she started sobbing openly, spouting apologies and pleas not to leave her. I turned away, unable to bear these pathetic false words. As the cab pulled away, I was hit with a sudden wave of sadness at her attempt to cheat on me and to give me up once again. But stronger than that was the feeling of pride and conviction that I had done the right thing in getting rid of such a toxic and deceitful person. I knew with certainty that things could only get better from here.